You're being deceived by these crazy high scanning rate, crazy low actuation points magnetic keyboards. Kind of. I realized it more and more after I got this latency testing tool, the OSLTT CS. I'm not gonna go to too much details on how it works. I already made a video about it, but what it pretty much does is it measures the time between when the keycap comes into contact and when the computer actually receives the input from the keyboard. So from what I can see, this is actually a more reliable testing tool instead of like getting the PCB and soldering, clipping, doing stuffs with the PCB, because that's not really how you're gonna be using the keyboard when gaming. You're actually going to be pressing the keycaps with your fingers. So it actually matters as well how accurately the magnetic keyboard can detect that distance, that 0.1 or whatever millimeters you set the keyboard to. So yeah, you can kind of see where I'm going here. After I tested a lot of different magnetic keyboards, 1000 Hz, 8000 Hz, some with 128k Hz scanning rate. But at the end of the day, it's still 8000 Hz polling rate, so it's kind of getting bottlenecked. But I'm not saying that scanning rate above 8000 is useless if you only have 8000 Hz polling rate. Not really useless. It's kind of like how having above 60 frames per second in game is still useful even though you only have 60 Hz refresh rate monitor. But of course, having a higher refresh rate monitor will actually let you see the difference clearly even more. So that's kind of how what's happening here, or at least from my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, because scanning rate is how fast the keyboard, the chip, the keyboard's microcontroller, how much it checks the keyboard per second, the changes. So yeah, having a high scanning rate is definitely good, but for the polling rate, it is how often the keyboard reports its state to the actual computer. So they have to work hand in hand, but logically and theoretically speaking, I think having a higher scanning rate is better than having a higher polling rate. Going back to monitor refresh rate and FPS comparison, it's like having 60 frames per second in game, but then having a 240 Hz monitor. It's like totally useless. But if we flip it and instead the monitor only has 60 Hz but we have 240 FPS in game, it's still usable even though you only have 60 Hz refresh rate monitor. So yeah, kind of same here. Having a higher scanning rate than the 8000 Hz polling rate is still gonna be usable. Oh, the nice, having a crazy high scanning rate is still better than having a low scanning rate, right? Even though it's not that noticeable. What's the scam about it? What's the deceiving part? Well, I think a lot of us, including me before, are too focused on those numbers, scanning rate, polling rate. The truth is, there's actually something else that we should be looking into more that is actually affecting the milliseconds, the latency of the keyboard, more than the crazy high scanning rates. Now, as always, I do give a little disclaimer that these results can still vary. There can be factors and mistakes that can affect the results, but yeah, as you can see over here, we have 4 magnetic keyboards at the top that is below 1 milliseconds. The Syntachrono 68 on 0.776 milliseconds, Wooting 80HE on 0.835 milliseconds, the Ying 63 on 0.867 milliseconds, then the Xitrix Easy 80 on 0.899 milliseconds. All 4 of these are on 8000 Hz polling rate, and the Syntachrono 68 is on 16k Hz scanning rate. The Wooting 80HE is on 8k Hz scanning rate. The WL mouse Ying 63 is around 16k to 32k, I'm pretty sure. I'm kinda assuming on that one because the Ying 75 is on 32k Hz scanning rate. Then the Xitrix Easy 80 is on 16k Hz scanning rate as well. So their scanning rates don't actually go crazy high, like 128k, 256k. They don't really go above 16k, 32k max probably, but yeah, some are even just on 8k Hz scanning rate, and it's beating these 128, 256k scanning rate keyboards over here. So like I said, these latency test results are proof that it's not just about the scanning rate, the crazy high numbers, but it is also about the things that cannot be numbered, like the firmware. I do believe these magnetic keyboards at the top have very well developed firmwares. I mean, you know, Wooting, they're one of the first magnetic keyboards in the market, and you definitely know how amazing their software, their firmware, their team is. Xitrix is also pretty well known. They do have an amazing team. They're not really a small brand. WL mouse, they also did an amazing job with the calibration and the firmware of this keyboard. And Syntech as well, not gonna lie, a lot of you might have not heard about this yet, but it's kind of newly released, but But yeah, their firmware is also very well organized or developed, obviously, with the testing results. So yeah, I do believe that the other keyboards here in the latency tests can actually score faster if we maybe retest them in the future with a better firmware after a lot of firmware updates. There's probably going to be some differences if they fix that and they organize, develop their firmware even more. And another thing that you can expect on a magnetic keyboard with a good firmware is good calibration. If a keyboard isn't calibrated well, instead of having an actual 0.1 millimeters or 0.01 millimeters actuation point, it might actually be a little bit higher because again, the keyboard is not well calibrated. Or another thing that can happen if your keyboard doesn't calibrate well, you will be forced to use bigger dead zones on top of your switches, which will definitely affect the latency testing results by a few milliseconds. So like imagine there's a race. One's on a bicycle, one's on a car. But the car starts like 100 meters away from the finish line, and then the bike only 1 meter. The bicycle is probably gonna win, and that is the well-calibrated keyboard right there that doesn't really require much dead zone. While the car, despite being very fast with crazy high scanning rates and a crazy machine inside, if it's not well calibrated, yeah, you're starting farther away. Since again, because of the dead zone or not a good calibrated keyboard, you're not really gonna start on a 0.1 millimeter distance or whatever you actually set. So yeah, I hope that made sense. If you're curious how you can actually test that out, well, I'm afraid you will have to buy a latency testing tool, you know, like this one that actually measures the moment you touch the keycap and when it will send the signal to the computer. But if you don't want to spend any money, well, obviously you can just watch someone else do it for free, like me. So, you know, subscribe, like the video. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm trying to say in this video. The video might have been actually longer than I expected it to be, probably because I wanted to explain, you know, the difference between scanning rate, polling rate, what it actually does to the keyboard, and why. I just wanted to explain everything. And before I end the video, I've been kind of focusing a lot on the scanning rate part, but the title also says low actuation point. Well, having a low actuation point is not bad, but having like crazy low below 0.05 millimeters, it's pretty much unusable, at least today, and I think in a few more years, not sure, because they're pretty much not going to be usable. There's going to be dead zone, and you will be required to have some dead zone, at least for the switches that we have at the moment, unless there's like ultra stable switches in the future. But like, I don't know how well will that slide, I don't know. But a crazy low millimeters actuation point, not really going to be usable. And since we were talking about the calibration and stuff, even though your millimeters actuation point isn't that crazy low, with a bad calibration firmware keyboard, it's also gonna be useless. So, you know, calibration firmware is really important as well that you should consider. From my experience, anything below 0.1 millimeters, it's gonna start accidentally actuating your keyboard without you even actually pressing them. If you have a very good firmware, well-calibrated keyboard, maybe you might be able to go down to 0.05 millimeters, especially with some keyboards having AI even built in to, like, I don't know when you're actually pressing it. But yeah, there's also features like anti-rattle, anti-shake, anti-misoperation modes that there is in magnetic keyboards that might enable you to use lower than 0.1 millimeters, but there's a high likely they're also just adding a bit of dead zone on top. But yeah, 0.1 millimeters, anything below that, maybe 0.05 millimeter max, that's the lowest you can go. 0.01, not really usable on the actuation point. Rapid trigger, maybe. Anything below 0.01 millimeters, that's like crazy low millimeters already. But at the end of the day, will you really notice that difference between like 0.5 millisecond, 0.1 millisecond? Very hard, or like absolutely not. But if a magnetic keyboard really has bad firmware and very bad calibration, the difference might be noticeable. Probably like very slightly though. But yeah, I pray and hope that this video helped you in some way. I pray and hope that you learned something. If you're interested in a more detailed review video on those keyboards, on the latency test I've showed, then just go ahead and search MIGS, MIGSS, and then the name of the keyboard on YouTube. It should pop up. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to stay grateful, and remember, Jesus loves you. Bye bye.